Fantasy fanfiction. Homelander is coming, fortunately I am Doomsday Superman. Chapter 51. Honey, why are you here? Yi Meng's words echoed slightly in the sealed basement. Definitely, this wife is not that wife. In Yi Meng's past life when he entertained until his death, a group called otaku liked to refer to the paper virtual heroine in games, anime, or movies as wife. This is because perhaps only virtual characters can achieve a certain degree of perfection in terms of appearance, connotation, personality, and ability. For example, the white Snow Witch robe witch doll currently placed on a separate isolated wooden shelf in the basement. The necromancer hat, the snow cloak, the small hands, the thin blue legs engraved with mysterious inscriptions, this is the noble and mysterious high-ranking temperament that makes her lose her composure and swear. Isn't it exactly the same as the demigod witch Lani in Al Deng Dharma Ring? The demigod witch Lani, she was a truly ruthless person who killed herself first, and finally wiped out the creator god in order to get rid of the restrictions of the world's original law. Yi Meng was a little dazed, remembering that in the setting of Alden's Ring, there was also a similar little Lani doll, and that doll was connected to the soul of the demigod witch herself. What appears here now, can't it be the real thing? Yi Meng quickly glanced at the data file of the intruded containment. Invasion Archives, Witch Dolls. Invasion Type, Creation. Intrusion Number, SAS 999. Casualties caused, none. Intrusion Level, identified as G level, lowest risk factor. Invasion Report, the witch puppet appeared out of thin air on the stage of Tianhe City in 0199 in the year of the Star Dragon. After testing, no obvious energy or special features were found. After being checked by the Dragon Girl, potential dangers were ruled out. This intrusion report does not appear to be the real one. There was a hint of disappointment in Yi Meng's eyes. If it hadn't appeared in the real world out of thin air, this puppet should not be regarded as an intrusion creation. In addition, Dragon Girl's Phoenix Force does not have a perception of the inner spirit, which further rules out the possibility that it is a genuine product. Yi Meng turned his gaze back to the vivid and lifelike witch doll, recalling the setting details now. The left eye of the little Lani doll is always open, while this doll's eyes are closed. Yi Meng reached out and touched the closed left eye of the witch puppet. With a cold and smooth touch from his fingertips, he found that the sealant was fixed and could not be opened. Apparently, it's just a highly imitated copy from another world. Even if it is genuine, it is completely disconnected from the soul of the witch behind the scenes on the way of the invasion and time travel. Pointless. Yi Meng shook his head, and put the witch doll with closed eyes on the isolation wooden stand into his pocket with his backhand. It's here, but you can't leave empty-handed. Yi Meng, who found nothing but his wife's handicraft from the previous life, turned around and walked towards the basement door. At the moment, there was chaos inside and outside the paranormal department building. A strange and dense white mist floated everywhere, the network communication signal between the city and the outside world was interrupted, the detective who led the team out of the department disappeared, and the high school students imprisoned in the isolation room escaped. One thing after another, the agents of the supernatural department were a little overwhelmed. Moreover, several agents who stayed behind in the supernatural department also discovered. In the white mist, there are really living creatures. Unknown creatures that don't belong in their world. Boom, boom. Unknown flight creatures that have never been seen before smashed through the window. They look like small pterosaurs, their dark eyes are constantly turning, and they are flapping their wings and breaking into the inner hunting. Under the cover of the white mist, there are fast shadows. With the warning and roar of the left-behind detectives, there was a sound. Da. Inside the supernatural department, fierce gunshots continued to ring out. The flames of the muzzles continued to emerge and the room filled with white mist, and the armed agents fought with the flight creatures from the white mist outside. Some flight creatures were smashed into a sieve by bullets and fell to the ground. An armed agent was sprayed with a mouthful of black mucus, and the protective clothing on his body was corroded and melted like a strong acid. He fell to the ground and screamed, and was ripped apart by a creature's sharp claws the next moment. The flight creatures originating from the strange and dense white mist in the outside world seem to be endless, and they are extremely good at hunting in the white mist. Even the left-behind agents who were armed and protected fell to the ground one after another, being besieged and killed by flight creatures as food. Run away. Yingzi. shouted an agent who had fallen to the ground. The bullets in the gun in the hands of the young female detective had been emptied, and she saw 3 bloody flight creatures flying towards her. Zhao Hao turned pale and rushed downstairs. Behind her was the furniture and lamps surrounded by white mist. Be smashed. Hoo. Detective Eiko was gasping for breath, making the goggles of the gas mask blurry, coupled with the thick white mist that filled the room. The department environment that she had been familiar with for a week became even stranger than when she first saw it, causing her to stumble fled indiscriminately. So, until you go down the stairs, you enter a wide, long and clean corridor inwards. Only then did Yingzi realize that he had come to the basement floor. Except for the inspector, no one in the department had the authority to enter here. Yingzi wanted to turn around, but found 3 flight creatures flying down the stairs, so he could only continue to flee inside. Wait, the basement door. How did it open? Chased by the demonic flight creatures in the fog, Yingzi raised his eyes, and in a blur, he saw the door of the basement was open. She gritted her teeth and rushed there. And at the moment Yingzi rushed into the door desperately, a slender figure just walked out of it. It was a teenager. The boy's quick reaction turned sideways, causing Yingzi to rush into the air and crash into the inner part of the basement. Without hesitation, the boy continued to walk towards the underground corridor leading to the outside world. Be careful, there are monsters. Before Yingzi finished speaking, he stopped abruptly, and his pupils froze suddenly. Facing the oncoming 3 flight creatures, the silver-haired boy stuck out his left and right hands covered with gray and white bone sheaths like lightning. Each of his hands strangled a flight creature that was flying forward, and then continued to move forward vigorously. Pat to the 3rd creature. Boom! Not even a howl came out. Blood exploded in the palms of the boy's closed bony hands. The heads and bodies of the 3 flight creatures were directly smashed, and the white mist in the corridor was dyed a little scarlet. Get it all done. The silver-haired boy threw away the limp corpse of the flight creature, waved his hands vigorously, and shook off all the black venom, mucus and blood attached to the gray-white exoskeleton. Glove. You are. Yingzi stared in astonishment at the familiar high school boy in the corridor outside. The silver-haired boy turned his head, and in the thick white mist, one eye faintly flashed a violent and destructive red light, which was soon covered by a rational and indifferent silver light. He didn't say anything, and left directly into the corridor. It wasn't until the figure of the other party completely disappeared in the underground corridor surrounded by white mist that the young female detective Yingzi murmured in a low voice, "It's him." Contain the intruder, high school student Yi Meng. Yi Meng walked out of the basement of the containment and left the supernatural department directly. The supernatural investigators couldn't protect themselves, and no one could stop him even if he was there. Outside, the white mist lingers and permeates the entire modern city, making everything blurry. Only black shadows that don't know whether they are living things or objects appear. Screams, roars, horns, sirens, falling objects, broken windows, and even gunshots, the mournful cries of the entire city, clearly entered the inhuman hearing of Yi Meng, who began to tend towards the Doomsday. Chilling, mysterious, strange, surprising, etc., the atmosphere is accompanied by white fog covering the city. Yi Meng hung the Lani doll on his waist as a pendant. Just as he walked out of the department door, exposed to the white mist, he was hunted down by several flight creatures in the mist. Who hunted whom? The expression on Yi Meng's face remained unchanged, the 5 fingers of his right hand stretched out straight, and the entire arm covered with a thin gray and white exoskeleton looked like a bone knife. The hand rises and the knife falls. Yi Meng is like a robot without mistakes, repeating the fierce movements of slaying. With the speed of the hunting wind, a flight creature with its head and body separated fell. After a while, more than a dozen flight creatures that attacked and killed all fell to the ground. Yi Meng looked indifferently at the other flight creatures fleeing and retreating, grabbed half of the deformed bird-like corpses, and wiped all the blood on the right-hand exoskeleton. It's really a fog, Yi Meng whispered. Seeing this deformed pterosaur-like creature with its own corrosive venom, Yi Meng immediately affirmed that the white mist and the creatures in the white mist originated from the fog. The Mist is a sci-fi movie. The movie tells that due to the military base experiment in the town, a fog enveloped the town area, and there are terrible creatures from other worlds in the fog. At present, this strange bird and beast with its own corrosive venom is one of the terrifying creatures that appear in the mist. Besides these, there are many larger, stronger and more terrible creatures, born of the mist. Among them, there are even mysterious creatures similar to Cthulhu. I'm afraid this city is about to end. Yi Meng recalled some details and settings in the fog. Although it was not mentioned in the movie, it can be speculated that the experiment on the military base led to the connection of the space where the town is located with another Cthulhu-like dimension. That's why the mist and a large number of alien creatures gushed out. Now, the situation in Tianhe City and the small town can't be said to be similar, it can only be said to be exactly the same. Does this mean that the entire city is connected with the invasion dimension from mist? If this is what Yi Meng thought, then in the real world, no one can stop this tragedy in Tianhe City. Not even Homelander. This is an invasion incident that can be at least classified as SSS level. What does that have to do with me? Yi Meng had no expression on his face, and looked at his left hand, which was also completely covered with gray and white exoskeleton. Now, his hands have obviously been assimilated by the Doomsday invasion in the dream. Even, together with character, Yi Meng felt that he was becoming less and less like a real human being. For example, facing the current fog and monsters in the fog, he didn't feel any fear, only the excitement of destruction and killing. This fog has reduced the entire city to a hunting ground for creatures from other dimensions. For Yi Meng, who is being assimilated by the Doomsday invasion, it is an excellent and wonderful venue for destruction, which makes him want to enter the fog to find the most powerful existence, and destroy and ravage the opponent to obtain satisfaction. As for the survival of the city, what does it have to do with him? Tifa. Yi Meng suddenly murmured to himself, looking towards the direction of the city center shrouded in mist. A trace of humanity reappeared in his slightly red eyes. In this city, he only cares about one person. Yi Meng quickened his pace toward the city center, and as soon as he picked up the speed, he jumped out like a cheetah. With every step he could cover a distance of 3 or 4 meters, even running faster and faster in the white mist. Perhaps because of the bloody smell of the mist bird on his body, no mist bird dared to attack him, and even ran away when they met him. Hunter reversed. Supernatural Department, basement level, containment basement. The young female detective Yingzi slumped on the ground, and only after 10 seconds came back to her senses did she grit her teeth and stand up. Because of seeing Yi Meng, Yingzi found that the white mist was not toxic, so he took off the gas mask he was wearing and breathed in the cold and bloody foggy air. We must go up and save people. Yingzi thought of other detective colleagues upstairs whose life and death were uncertain, gritted her teeth and got up again, but just as she was about to leave the basement, a small voice suddenly came from the empty basement. She turned around suddenly. Is that the trumpet? In the mist, Yi Meng's speed in the urban area was getting faster and faster, reaching the normal speed of a car. Accompanied by a clear cracking sound, the canvas shoes on his feet were directly smashed by himself. Along with the cement pavement, a shallow footprint was also cracked. Yi Meng looked down and saw the soles of both feet. The protruding bones and joints also showed a layer of hard gray bone. The fog of killing intensified the desire for self-destruction, which also accelerated the speed of the invasion and assimilation of Doomsday. Yi Meng Mingwu, if this continues, he will completely lose control and become a day of destruction in 3 days. Under such invasion and assimilation, he scanned the surroundings, his eyes had a faint red glow, and his vision began to become clearer. Even under the fog with extremely low visibility, you can clearly see things 100 meters away. Fog shrouded the city, and less than 10 minutes had passed. Now, the streets of the modern city are empty. Many vehicles have been involved in a series of accidents, parked on the road or crashed into buildings. Thick smoke rises everywhere in the fog. On the ground of a messy modern street, all kinds of garbage and blood can be seen everywhere, as well as the corpses of humans or misty birds, and even the deformed flesh of other creatures. The human beings outside the house have almost been hunted and killed, and many residents are hiding in the house and dare not come out. Yi Meng quickly understood the current situation in the city, and he hoped that Tifa could also stay in the house temporarily, so as not to become the first hunting targets of the creatures in the mist. Continue on your way to the city center where Tifa's house is located. Yi Meng's ears moved slightly, and he heard the intense gunshots from the urban area a kilometer ahead, but the gunfire was constantly weakening, and there was still the scream of dying in it. Could it be? Within 100 meters of the gunshots, Yi Meng jumped 5 meters high and stood steadily on a street lamp that was turned off. The fog is lingering. Even if you stand under the street lamp, you will not find someone standing on the street lamp. Yi Meng looked up, his eyes pierced through the thick fog, and found that it was indeed the armed detective team of the middle-aged detective leader of the supernatural department. However, now there are only 2 people left, including the middle-aged detective. In front of them, in the mist, stood a nearly 5-meter-tall mantis-like creature. The misty mantis's body was full of bullet holes, but it still made a sharp and ear-piercing cry. It was like a tank crawling forward. As the large sharp mantis in its right hand swung down, the air in the body of an armed agent was cut directly. "Sir!" The armed detective's scream stopped abruptly, and blood splashed all over the middle-aged detective behind him. The middle-aged detective pulled the trigger in front of the misty mantis, but the gun was empty. The bullet clip in the rifle in his hand had already been emptied. "Monster, invading monster." The middle-aged detective threw away his gun, looked blankly at the dead detectives all around him, then raised his head and smiled miserably at the misty mantis, who raised a large praying knife towards him. Ended. Yi Meng watched indifferently, but didn't intend to make a move. They don't know each other well. But at this time, Yi Meng noticed something. His pupils were slightly red, and he was able to vaguely see into the middle-aged detective's body. At this moment, something awakened in the opponent's body, so that the genetic chain was broken, and the blood boiled like water. "Ah!" The middle-aged detective wailed in pain. The upright human face was distorted and shapeshifting into a triangle, and the body also resembled a balloon expanding and growing. Under Yi Meng's indifferent gaze, the middle-aged detective was lying on the ground. His flesh and blood body was twisted and stretched, and the horns and outer skin protruded, turning into a triceratops. That's right, it's the triceratops of the Cretaceous period, a living dinosaur. Inspector, the top person in charge of the supernatural department of Tianhe City, turned into a triceratops. Yi Meng's pupils shrank, and his thoughts flowed quickly, connecting many things together. He muttered to himself, 200 years ago, a dragon took off in the east. So it is. Yi Meng suddenly understood. In addition to the guardian dragon girl on the surface, there is really a dragon in the eastern jurisdiction. A dragon hiding in the dark and controlling the Federation. In the fog-shrouded city, the middle-aged detective who monitors and prevents the invasion turns into a triceratops monster and fights with the mist mantis. Yi Meng stared at this scene coldly, and thought through many things at once. Previously, due to the arrival of the guardian goddess dragon girl, he mistakenly believed that in the myths circulated by the real Star Dragon Federation, the soaring dragon referred to the dragon girl. But in retrospect, there is a doubt. Even with the Phoenix Force, the opponent's physique is still an ordinary person. How could it be possible to live from 200 years ago to the present? So, maybe in the real world, there really is a dragon. The reason why Yi Meng thinks this way is because in the previous movie he knew there really was a villain who could control dinosaur monsters. It's just that it was an extremely vicious black python. Later, it failed to snatch the Dragon Ball with another snake and was punished and killed by the Dragon of Justice. That movie, called War of the Dragons. Yi Meng's eyes fell back to the cruel battlefield ahead. The middle-aged inspector turned into a 3-meter-tall, 9-meter-long triceratops monster. His hard and rough cortex held up the large mantis for slashing. And below, the slim body of the misty mantis was directly trampled into meat paste. Hold head high. The eyes of the triceratops monster showed ferocity, showing a posture of victory and fighting spirit, and it was roaring with its head up, but in the next moment, several large tentacles protruded from the mist, tightly entangled its thick neck and forelegs. Tread. The triceratops monster struggled desperately, stretching the large tentacles with sucker blobs straight, but it was difficult to break free from the shackles of the tentacles. Instead, more tentacles continued to protrude from the depths of the fog, entangled its body and limbs. Rustle. Several large tentacles exerted force together, dragging the terrified and struggling triceratops forward abruptly, into the depths of the mist. In the depths of the mist, a dark bloody mouth opened and swallowed the huge head of the triceratops in one gulp. Coupled with the continuous entanglement of several dozens of meters-long tentacles, the movement and sound of the triceratops struggle quickly stopped. Huge amounts of tentacle meat mountain in the mist continued to squirm for a while, until it swallowed the entire Triceratops monster, and unsatisfied stretched out a sucker tentacle, and rolled back the previous corpse of the mist mantis. Under supervision, Yi Meng could see it clearly. It was a large octopus-shaped monster, as large as a 4- or 5-story building, like a strange mountain of meat waving its tentacles constantly. It had been in the mist before, lurking motionless, like the shadow of a building, and it didn't hunt until now. The misty tentacle monster devoured the 6-meter-tall misty mantis and the middle-aged detective in the form of a triceratops all at once. Gululu. In the constantly wriggling meat mountain, several pairs of small eyes frantically turned, looking at the street lamp dozens of meters away, and then a tentacle popped out. "Oh, did you find me?" Yi Meng raised a cruel arc on the corner of his mouth, and a violent red light that he was suppressing emerged from his eyes. Facing the attacking large tentacles, he remained motionless, letting the large tentacles wrap around his waist and roll back. The strong wind howled, and a mouthful of foul-smelling blood opened again, like an abyss. Compared with the misty tentacle monster, the physique of human beings is more than 10 times different. Just like mice and ligers, they appear extremely fragile and small. The misty tentacle monster tried to stuff the tentacle-wrapped human teenager into its mouth just like it had devoured countless human beings before. But at this time, a pair of gray and white bone feet kicked out suddenly, stepping on the two ends of the blood plate's mouth from left to right. No matter how tight the blood plate's mouth seemed to be, it was difficult to continue to close it. This creature. Why is it different from other creatures of the same kind living here? The misty tentacle monster was extremely confused, and its tiny eyes, which turned wildly, met a pair of violent and destructive pupils in front of it. "You want to eat me? Do you deserve it?" Yi Meng said coldly with no expression on his face. The misty tentacle monster couldn't understand his words, but he could feel a trembling breath emerging from the opponent. That is, irresistible and powerful. Laugh. Before the mist tentacle monster could react, the tentacles that entangled the young man suddenly broke into 2 pieces, and the incision was as smooth as a saw. The severed tentacles have not landed yet. Yi Meng, who broke free from the bondage, stepped on the meat mountain and jumped forward. He did not escape or dodge, but took the initiative to pounce on the head of the misty tentacle monster, and stab the forehead above the eyes with a knife in his right hand. The arm is almost completely submerged in it. The misty tentacle monster immediately let out a painful hiss, and several tentacles twitched wildly at the same time, causing the fog in the area to surge, and the broken tentacles healed extremely quickly. Rumble. The nearby street lamps and vehicles were shape-shifted by the large tentacles, and the outer wall of the adjacent building was also dented by the large body. However, Yi Meng was still firmly nailed to the head of the misty tentacle monster. No matter how the tentacle monster struggled, he remained indifferent. His left arm also sank into the soft flesh, and then his left and right hands pulled out forcefully. In this instant, the flesh, muscles, bones, and inner tissues were all broken. The head of the vehicle file size was directly torn in half by the bone hand. The tentacles dancing wildly in the wriggling and rolling body of the misty tentacle monster stopped abruptly, and then collapsed like a real mountain of meat. "Who do you think you are?" The silver-haired boy stood on the huge corpse of the misty tentacle monster, with a crazy and violent grin on his face, and the soles of his feet covered with gray-white exoskeleton continued to pedal down, and each foot was stronger than the other. Until the end, with the strength and speed of breaking through the sonic boom, the huge head of the misty tentacle monster was completely crushed. Sizzle. Blood splattered. It seems to obtain a certain sense of destruction satisfaction from this. The unemotional red light in the eyes of the silver-haired boy finally faded away, and the cold gray exoskeleton on his feet, which looked like white bone armor, began to spread from the soles of his feet to his knees, and the protruding muscles and bones were covered with bone patterns first. Yi Meng lowered his eyes indifferently, looking down at the large, bloody corpse at his feet, and the modern city surrounded by fog. All conspiracies, all strange and powerful, appear vulnerable before absolute destruction. After possessing the avatar of Doomsday, nothing in this world is enough to shake or frighten him. He has always been only an enemy of himself. Because he is the most powerful and terrifying monster in the real world. Before the desire for destruction completely overwhelms reason, the silver-haired boy whispered. Yi Meng squatted slightly, the strength of the legs covered by the exoskeleton was increasing every moment, and now it had reached a terrifying level. Tread. As soon as he moved, the strong wind blew away the fog in place, and the confused and swift figure jumped towards the central city area tens of meters away. The fog where it passed was forcefully dispersed all the way, leaving behind a strange inhuman movement track, which was soon submerged by the surging fog, only the red pupils flickering on and off. The doomsday of the real world is approaching. Tianhe City, the central city. The fog is lingering, and countless huge unknown creatures move through the fog. Some are like vehicles, some are like hills, and the entire modern city has been reduced to a purgatory on earth, with screams and fierce sounds from time to time. A luxury residential area with every inch of golden land. More than a dozen military tanks and armed vehicles drove onto the city road, walked slowly through the fog, pushed the vehicles away, and fired a bunch of shells and dense bullets from time to time, repelling the monsters in the fog with fierce fire blows. Kaka. Armed tanks and soldier vehicles stopped in front of a private house with iron bars and a yard. Be alert on the spot. A heavily armed local military officer dismounted from the passenger seat of the vehicle. In about 10 seconds, 2 butlers came out from the private residence and opened the iron gate. Immediately afterwards, the door of the private residence opened, and a middle-aged man in a suit and leather shoes with great temples walked out under the protection of 2 bodyguards. "You are the chairman of Dream's Century Technology Industry, Mr. Meng." The local officer saluted and said in a deep voice, "I am the local colonel stationed in Tianhe City, and I am here to protect the safety of you and your family." Mr. Meng breathed a sigh of relief when he heard the words, and looked at the dense fog around him. "That's great. With you here, we can rest assured." The local officer nodded, and quickly said, "Please clean up immediately and evacuate with us." Evacuate. Mr. Meng was taken aback, his face became serious again. Is the situation so serious? It's not very optimistic. We are continuing to organize the evacuation of survivors towards the military base in the east of the city, and then arrange human escorts to evacuate out of the city. The local military officers didn't hide him either. After all, the whole city was in crisis now, and even if they wanted to, they couldn't hide it. He urged, "Please prepare to evacuate as soon as possible. In addition to you, we are also responsible for evacuating other survivors in many cities." "I see." Knowing the urgency of the situation, Mr. Meng couldn't help speeding up his pace and immediately returned to his private residence. Residential interior. The middle-aged lady who had been hiding in the basement walked out with the help of a young man. A white-collar woman and a black-haired girl also came out. "Honey, how's it going outside?" The middle-aged lady worriedly looked at Mr. Meng, who returned to the room with a solemn face. Mr. Meng glanced at everyone, and said helplessly, "The military is here, let us evacuate, head towards the eastern military base, and then use this to withdraw from the city." As soon as this was said, the people in the house fell silent, and the need to evacuate the city was enough to see the seriousness of the situation. It shows that the military is still unable to fully deal with the inherent mysterious crisis of controlling the city. Mr. Meng smiled, and said calmly enough, "Let's go. Life is important. Other cities also have our industries. At worst, we start from scratch." The middle-aged lady echoed, "That's right, let's prepare now, just bring important items, and leave other heavy things." As soon as the two spoke, it was basically settled. Evacuate the city with the army. But at this moment, a sweet and determined girl's voice sounded, "Evacuate to the east of the city, I'm going to the south of the city." On the field, everyone's complexion changed suddenly, and they looked at the black-haired girl with puzzled and dignified expressions. "Miss File sighs." Chen Hong looked anxiously at the black-haired girl beside her. She naturally knew that Yi Meng was being detained in the southern part of the city. "Just give me a car," Mengtifa said without doubt. She glanced at everyone on the field, and her clear and calm eyes finally fell on Mr. Meng. "I see." Mr. Meng closed his eyes heavily, then opened them again, took out a bunch of car keys from his pocket, and handed them over. The moment he handed over the car keys, he lowered his voice and said to the black-haired girl, thank you for your help 3 years ago. I should be grateful. It is you who gave me a home in this world." Tifa smiled slightly, took the key, put it in his pocket and walked towards the underground garage. Father, Mother. It's very dangerous outside, how can we let her leave alone? The young man looked anxiously at his parents. Mr. Meng shook his head and said in a deep voice, you know that. Once she makes a decision, she will never change her mind. The middle-aged lady sighed, feeling extremely regretful. Sure enough, she will leave our house sooner or later. Chen Hong stomped her feet, but still chased after the girl. 5 minutes later. Under the surprised eyes of all the army soldiers, an off-road vehicle drove out of the underground garage of a private residence, accelerated into the white mist and drove away. Next door, in another private house, Wang Zan was preparing to evacuate with the army. He faintly saw the figure of a graceful girl sitting on the driver's seat of the off-road vehicle. He was taken aback for a moment and then laughed wildly. Crazy, she is really crazy. The off-road vehicle drove out of the private residential area, onto the deserted road, and escaped into a quiet white mist. This fog, it's too difficult to see the road clearly. While speaking, Chen Hong in the driver's seat firmly grasped the steering wheel. Fear made her body tremble continuously, but she still had to concentrate on avoiding the bunker. Tifa on the passenger seat looked at her and sighed, Aunt Chen, actually you don't need to accompany me. Stop talking nonsense. Chen Hong gritted her teeth and said, I've said it before, the only thing I want in this life is to look at you, Sister File sighs, to be happy. The words are not finished yet. The off-road vehicle seemed to have directly crashed into a mysterious creature that jumped out of the mist, and the car window burst into cracks, leaving bloodstains. What? Chen Hong was astonished, and subconsciously wanted to stop the car. Don't stop, keep driving. But Tifa directly inserted her slender white foot and stepped on the gas pedal. The off-road vehicle continued to stagger out in the fog. Immediately afterwards, the rear of the car seemed to be scratched by something, leaving a shocking tear and scratch. Chen Hong was still in shock, and continued to drive the off-road vehicle. Then drive a certain distance to the south of the city. Behind him, the reassuring sound of shells is fading away. The farther south you go, the less people there are, and finally it seems that only the 2 people in the car are left in the whole fog. Chen Hong began to gradually adapt to driving in the fog, constantly avoiding the bunker, but at this moment, the white fog in the urban area ahead seemed to wrap around the off-road vehicle that was driving slowly forward. That's cobweb. Tifa opened her beautiful eyes and said quickly. Chen Hong was startled, and looked at the cracked windshield. Sure enough, there were a lot of white cobwebs wrapped around the car body. These white spider webs, almost blending with the mist, become a perfect trap. Reverse. Tifa's reaction was fast enough, but it was still a step too late. The off-road vehicle was already deeply trapped in the spider web, and black spiders the size of adult cats climbed onto the body along the cobweb. Cobwebs and spiders densely surrounded the off-road vehicle. Sister File sighs, it's all my fault. Seeing this, Chen Hong was horrified and regretful. Don't give up, we will survive. Tifa spoke forcefully, reaching into her pocket as if about to take something out. But at this moment, a sudden change occurred. Boom! The ground surface was sunken, accompanied by the loud sound of some kind of heavy object falling on the road beside the car. The group of fog spiders with the size of an adult cat's file size was startled for a while, and then receded like a tide, returning to the fog, as if they were afraid of some terrible existence. What happened? Chen Hong was at a loss. Di-La stared out of the car window blankly, and he could see a figure walking towards here in the mist, with a faint silver light flickering. Without the slightest hesitation, Tifa pressed the unlock button, her slender and tight legs bent and kicked violently, kicking open the car door that was entangled by the cobweb. Miss File sighs. Under Chen Hong's startled shout and gaze. The black-haired girl rushed out of the car in a hurry, opened her hands, and threw herself into the arms of the figure in the mist. You found me. I knew it, you would come to me. Tifa hugged the man's neck tightly with both hands, her beautiful eyes sparkled. How is it possible, it will be him. Chen Hong in the car looked at the familiar figure walking out of the white mist, could it be the boy named Yi Meng? But when she saw Yi Meng's current situation clearly, Chen Hong's face froze, and her body trembled uncontrollably. Visible. The hands and arms of the silver-haired boy were all covered with a layer of gray-white exoskeleton, The shoes were gone long ago, the trousers were broken into half-length trousers, and the exposed legs and feet were also covered with a layer of gray-white exoskeleton. There is a cute and petite witch doll hanging on his waist, but he is terrifying and weird. The exoskeleton even spreads from the neck to the face, like wearing a small half-gray bone mask fake. The exoskeleton is mixed with molten iron to create an assembly line arc, which perfectly fits the young Shinchang's body shape, just like a bone armor. There were even hideous bone spurs protruding faintly from the opponent's arm and back. Half human, half bone monster, this is the image of a teenager today. Yi Meng sniffed the faint fragrance of the black-haired girl's hair, the red light in his eyes disappeared a little, revealing a rational silvery look, and the exoskeleton gently hugged the girl with both hands. Yes, I found you. It's not bad to see you again before you are completely lost into destruction. There is no water. You can say less, but there is really no hydrology. I believe that each chapter has content and details, and this recent realistic plot will have a profound impact on the future. In the Doomsday City and the Weird Fog, two people, one big and one small, hug each other. The younger girl is in her budding youth, her smooth black hair cascading down to her waist like a waterfall. She is wearing a coat vest and tight leather pants due to emergency escape, but she still outlines a graceful and exquisite moving curve. Wearing gloves and leather boots, the skin exposed to the mist is so fair and smooth that it flows with light. Even in the current situation, it is still noble and beautiful. It is indeed reasonable to rely on looks and appearance alone to have star-level fans on the internet, and to make the stock of Dream Century Industries rise. But Chen Hong knows very well that Meng Tifa, the file-size sister, is definitely not a vase. Under the beautiful appearance, her personality, talent, vision, temperament, etc. are all first class. She is a truly perfect beauty embryo, and the whole world will be amazed by her in 2 years when she matures and blends into her youth. While at the moment embraces a petite and beautiful girl, the older boy is scary. Most of the originally slender body was covered with an exoskeleton, making it look taller and stronger. The tendons and body shape were in an assembly line, and the clothes on his body were torn by hideous and smooth bone spurs. Starting from the corner of the right eye, the young and handsome face is also covered with a small bone-like mask. The right eye is faintly pulsating with an inextinguishable red flame, and an aura of killing and destruction lingers and rises. On the ground behind the silver-haired bone spur boy, a cracked and sunken pothole can be vaguely seen. It is conceivable that the young man fell from the sky just now, leaving such traces on the concrete road. Not to mention the fog spider just now. At the moment Chen Hong still felt chills all over while watching this scene, and wanted to step forward and drag Miss File-Size back. Belle and Beast didn't dare to act like this is clearly a beautiful girl and a monster. What happened to Yi Meng one day later? Chen Hong couldn't understand. In the white mist. Tifa naturally also noticed the abnormality of Yi Meng's current body, but his left hand was still tightly clasping the boy's neck. His eyes fell on the shape-shifting beauty of himself, and his right hand naturally touched the exoskeleton on his chest. Her beautiful eyes as soft as rubies still contained tears of joy, and her ruddy mouth, which was so soft without a trace of wrinkle, was slightly opened. Instead of being afraid, she showed a curious and exploring expression, and she directly poked it with her slender index finger, musculoskeletal fingers, as if touching iron. No, it is obviously much harder than iron. It's so tough. Tifa exclaimed in amazement. That smart and playful, cute yet look was no different from the past. Yi Meng's tired and exhausted physical and mental will, as if he had been baptized, suddenly wanted to laugh. He knew that Tifa was worried that he cared too much about his current appearance, so he first stated that he didn't care about it. Aren't you afraid? Yi Meng asked calmly. You mean the spider just now? It's really scary, it's so big. Tifa blinked. I mean, me. Yi Meng met Tifa's eyes closely, and pointed to himself. Aren't you Yi Meng? There's nothing to be afraid of. You saved me just now. If it wasn't for you, I would have been gnawed into a skeleton by spiders. Tifa stuck out her tongue, then reacted immediately, punched the exoskeleton with a clang, and said through gritted teeth, You don't think you want to dump me, scumbag? After 3 years, want to run away after eating and wiping off? That's not okay, I'm very difficult. As she said that, the girl was furious, a bit tough and unladylike, and jumped forward to wrap her legs around the boy's body, like a large doll clinging tightly to the boy's body. Seeing this, Chen Hong's heart trembled in the car, for fear that a bone spur in her back would directly poke a hole in Miss Filesize's leg. And next, Chen Hong's eyes were staring straight, and she almost collapsed in her seat from fright. Visible. Just when Yi Meng and Tifa reunited to talk, a group of giant shadows the size of a small hill wriggled out of the mist, and quickly approached the crawling creature. Several large suction cup tentacles protruded from the mist first. Big, Miss Filesize. Chen Hong called out with a vibrato. Tifa, who was hanging on Yi Meng's body, also noticed the situation behind Yi Meng, and opened her beautiful eyes. Yi Meng, behind you. I know, just close your eyes. Yi Meng said. It is good. As death approached, Tifa really closed her eyes, only her thick eyelashes trembling slightly, which showed her unimaginable confidence and trust in Yi Meng. Rustle. The large tentacles stretched out towards Tifa and Yi Meng in an outflanking manner, and Chen Hong showed a look of despair, recognizing that it was a monster that the army must return with shells. On the nick of time, Yi Meng carefully supported the girl's body with the palm of his left hand, turned around slightly, and jumped forward. The slowest speed under restraint was still faster than the tentacles. The strong wind blew, the mist surged, and the huge black shadow revealed a huge body of a misty tentacle monster like a mountain of meat. Yi Meng clenched his right hand and swung it straight forward. The gray-white fist end that looked like a smooth exoskeleton glove turned into an afterimage, and the air in front of it burst open layer by layer, followed by the explosion followed by the mountain of meat touched by the fist end. The unparalleled extraordinary power penetrated and broke through everything. Sonic booms and storms follow. Boom. Chen Hong's eyes were dull, looking at Roshan's body that was sunken, festered and then burst open under this punch, and saw the 1,000-meter fog that filled the urban area in front of him washed away by the aftermath of this punch. This is the legendary power that can only be possessed by gods, but it is manifested in the hands of a boy who turned into a monster. How could she know that even if the gods came in person, she would turn around and run away? This is the power called Doomsday. What's wrong? Did the monster run away? Tifa's eyes were still closed. She didn't know what happened just now, she just felt like she was on a roller coaster. Well, I ran away, I can open my eyes now. Yi Meng nodded his head lightly, retracted his fist, and the red flame surging in his eyes became stronger again. Really? Tifa opened her eyes and looked around. Sure enough, she couldn't see the tentacle monster just now. It's just that there are countless pieces of meat left on the surrounding roads, and the fog surged back again to cover up everything that happened just now. As the only person who witnessed the brief battle just now, Chen Hong was completely silent. The monster did run away, back to its own dimension, to hell. Are you okay? Tifa didn't care what was going on with the monster. She checked Yi Meng's situation immediately worried, and saw a little bit of gray continued to spread on her face, and the mask-like exoskeleton was about to cover half of her face. As for Yi Meng's face, there is only an area of the body that is not covered by the exoskeleton. Yi Meng let the girl touch his hard exoskeleton mask, raised his hand to touch the other's hair, and then paused after realizing something. I'm fine, this city is very dangerous, everything will be discussed after we evacuate the city bar. But Tifa reached out to hold his hard and cold bone hand, and agreed, okay, we will find a way to deal with your current situation after we leave the city. No problem. Yi Meng smiled, sent Tifa back to the passenger seat of the car, and greeted the woman in the driver's seat by the way. Hello. Chen Hong shivered, as if facing a god and demon, and said in awe and caution, do we need to go to the military base in the east of the city? Now, the army will evacuate the survivors there, and organize armed protection to form a defense line, and evacuate all survivors from the city from the eastern suburbs. She is worried that Yi Meng will become a target of the army in his current state. And this will be a very terrible thing for the army. No, we're not going east. Yi Meng shook his head directly, let's leave to the west of the city. West. Tifa blinked, the west of the city and the military base in Tianhe City were exactly in the opposite direction. Yi Meng said calmly, you don't think that the misty tentacle monster just now is the strongest and largest creature in the mist? No way. Chen Hong's eyes widened in horror, and her face instantly turned pale. There are even more huge amounts of monsters. The fog tentacle monster is like a hill in the file size of the building, and it needs to be beaten back with tank shells to open the way. And how big is the huge amounts of the fog monster? There was insight in Tifa's eyes. You mean, the movement of the army's shells and the presence of many survivors will attract those huge creatures in the mist to gather there? Yi Meng nodded. This is inevitable. After all, he had seen it just now. Chen Hong tried to start the car, but there was no response from the brakes, and her face became even paler. It's broken, the spider just broke the car. Yi Meng said, no need to drive. Fasten your seat belts, I'll take you out of here. Don't drive, but have to fasten your seat belt. How do we leave? Chen Hong was confused. Tifa has obediently fastened the seat belt firmly. The doors close. The next moment, the whole off-road vehicle trembled slightly, and then under Chen Hong's dumbfounded gaze, the 2-ton off-road vehicle carrying 2 people was raised by 2 meters in height. Is he going to? Chen Hong understood something, and hurriedly fastened the seat belt that was already on. The next moment she fastened her seat belt. Boom! The road is cracked and sunken, and strong winds blow out. The off-road vehicle ejected obliquely like a rocket, broke through the fog, and flew to an altitude of about 100 meters very quickly. Inside the car, both Chen Hong and Tifa were firmly pressed against the leather seat by the powerful inertia. However, the reactions of the two are obviously completely different. The woman Chen Hong had a sudden cardiac arrest, her pupils were dull, and she looked out of the car window in horror like a fool, watching the off-road vehicle fly over the tall buildings in the fog. And the girl Tifa's fair and delicate face flushed with excitement. It's amazing, this is too amazing. It's so big. It's going to die, it's going to die. Ah! Under the woman's scream, the off-road vehicle constantly descended to the height of the drop, and it seemed to fall towards the dome of the tall building. Don't talk, your tongue will be bitten off. Tifa reminded in time. Chen Hong immediately covered her mouth tightly. Boom! The strong wind blew away again, and the strong force almost threw the two of them out of the window. Fortunately, the air cushion popped out in time, and the off-road vehicle flew high into the distance again. The hurricane raged and the fog broke. Covered with obvious exoskeleton spurs, Yi Meng, who is half-doomed and half-human, just carried the off-road vehicle with both hands, and jumped to the suburbs using the building as a pedal. In fact, he can still leap higher and farther now. It's just that considering the range of strong pressure that humans can withstand, and the critical point of scrapping off-road vehicles, it's considered an extremely conservative, lightly, jumping walk. Boom, boom, boom. The fog broke open one after another, and the boy with bone spurs carried the off-road vehicle and kept jumping into the distance, towards the outskirts of the western city. On the other side, the eastern city. Near the outskirts, the local military base stationed. Under the shroud of white mist like countless ghosts, the atmosphere is oppressive and dignified. More than a dozen heavy armored tanks outside the base subway network, together with turrets and hundreds of armed soldiers, established an absolute line of defense against the mist monsters. Under the fierce fire suppression, the mist tentacle monsters would also retreat. One after another, armed vehicles transported the survivors here for resettlement, and then organized buses or vehicles to evacuate the survivors outside the city. Wang Zan and his family were escorted here, in the open space of the base with tens of thousands of people. Watching the artillery fire outside, Wang Zan held his bandaged abdomen and let out a sigh of relief. Suddenly, a dark and strong boy came from here and asked anxiously, Wang Zan, I remember that you live near Meng Tifa, have you seen her? Pan Hu. Wang Zan naturally recognized the other party, and said with a smile, I saw it, she drove into the fog, and did not evacuate here with the army. With an expression of great anticipation, he licked his lips, the joy that would be ruined if he didn't get it. It is estimated that it has been eaten by the fog monster now. What did you say? We were classmates, why did you do this? Pan Hu's eyes widened angrily. If it weren't for us, you would have been killed by the alien. Wang Zan's handsome face was hard to look at, and he was holding his stomach that was still hurting, which was a black spot that he needed to heal in his whole life. He actually gave birth to an alien head. You. Just as Wang Zan was about to say something, he stopped short and stared forward with dull eyes. At the moment, inside and outside the base, the officers, soldiers, and survivors were all dumbfounded, looking out of the military base in inexplicable horror. In the mist, A black shadow of a sheep-like giant standing on all fours looms faintly. The specific strange shape is simply indescribable. The four limbs alone are taller than tall buildings. The head rises into the clouds deep in the mist. Every step makes the ground tremble violently. Shake. Fire! The officer yelled. Immediately, more than a dozen tanks and gun barrels roared and fired together, like thunder bursts, and groups of explosive waves ushered in the depths of the fog and above the black shadows. Explosive waves and fog enveloped the forelegs of the giant sheep shadow. But immediately after, the giant sheep shadow continued to move forward without any reaction, stepped forward and stepped several armored tanks into discus, and continued to break into the military base in a leisurely, natural, cruel and bloody way. Not only one, but also other giant sheep shadow creatures, walking out from the depths of the mist, like mountains that cut across the world. At this moment, no matter how brave and fearless the soldier was, he felt sincere despair. "Quick, run away!" Someone yelled in despair, and then everyone fled crazily, and the military base was completely in chaos. Tianhe City, the western suburbs. The further you go to the forest on the outskirts of the city, the more the fog will be diluted until the fog completely disappears and the air becomes clean and fresh. Boom! On the edge of the city shrouded in mist, a gray-white figure leapt out carrying a four-wheel drive off-road vehicle and landed in the thicket within the forest. A ditch more than 10 meters long was directly plowed out of the ground. A big tree snapped and snapped. Yi Meng finally stopped and slowly lowered the off-road vehicle he was holding in his hands, and the at the moment off-road vehicle was also on the verge of being scrapped. Finally, it stopped. In the car, Chen Hong panted heavily, feeling that she almost died, not joking about the kind of real death. Beside her, Tifa's face was flushed, as if she had been on an exciting and deadly roller coaster ride. The two looked out of the car window, and there was no forest shrouded in white mist, and they both showed surprise. It can be regarded as coming out. Yi Meng. Tifa tried to open the door, but the door didn't budge. Yi Meng pressed the door, and through the car window, said hoarsely and quickly, "Tifa, there is no time, you listen to me. Continue to walk out, and you will enter the town. When you get there, continue to evacuate, it's too late. The farther the market is, the better." The joy on Tifa's face completely disappeared. Won't you go with us?" Again, Yi Meng was taken aback. Indeed, it was like returning alone to the alien spaceship hunting aliens on the day of the college entrance examination. However, this time is completely different from last time. "It is true that I cannot leave you. But listen to me, this is my plan." Yi Meng seemed to be holding back something, his voice became hoarse, the red light kept flashing outside the car, and the breath frightened the birds and beasts in the mountains away. "In your pocket, there is a USB flash drive. There are some new technologies I got there. You can use it to start a technology company in another city. If you can, I hope you can wait for me. When I settle the matter with me, I will definitely go out to find you." Yi Meng said hoarsely but firmly. Inside the car, Chen Hong fell silent, looking at the trembling black-haired girl beside her. She was afraid that Sister File Size would agree. Once she agrees, Miss File Size probably won't be able to get rid of the name, Yi Meng, in her life. However, she inexplicably hoped that Miss File Size would agree. Tifa asked in a low voice, "You must go back." "Definitely." Yi Meng nodded solemnly. Not for all mankind, not for the city, just for himself. Yi Meng found that due to the existence of the fog, the speed of assimilation of the Doomsday invasion was too fast. From a week, it was shortened to 3 days, and now it is less than half a day. When he met Tifa, he was on the verge of losing control. It seemed that the situation had improved just now, but in fact it was just the flashback of the last struggle of reason. With the invasion and assimilation to such a degree, Yi Meng can no longer resist the Doomsday. Even if Tifa is used as the anchor of human nature, he can't restrain the desire for destruction. Therefore, Yi Meng must return to Tianhe City. At the moment Tianhe City is connected to another foggy dimension, and there are a large number of creatures powerful enough to supply him with destruction. The only thing that can satisfy Doomsday is destruction. So, he wants to go back and destroy everything. Until he solves or controls the power of Doomsday. Tifa is Yi Meng's only concern in Tianhe City, and he has no scruples about sending him away. It is good. Inside the car, the girl's cold and firm words came out, "I'll wait for you. I'll wait for you outside, until you come back, no matter 10 years or 50 years. This is not an agreement, it's a contract between you and me." The reunion took less than 10 minutes, and the agreement was pulled away again. Time limit, no time limit. I will definitely find you. Yi Meng threw down this sentence, the red light in his eyes almost turned into actual scorching flames. He turned around without hesitation, and a hurricane dust exploded on the spot. Countless fall also fly upward. Snapped. The car door was pushed open from the inside to the outside, and the girl Tifa rushed out of the car. The crystals in her eyes came out of her sockets, turning into tears and running across her delicate face. In the gradually blurred vision, the silver-haired boy who completely turned into a bone spur monster broke through the sound barrier and leapt high towards the modern city shrouded in fog 1,000 meters away, until his gray back disappeared. In Tianhe City, the huge and indescribable sheep-like creatures walk in the fog, like black shadows of mountains that traverse the world, and the buildings and infrastructure are destroyed wherever they pass. It is difficult to see their true colors, but it makes people feel desperate. How should humans fight against this giant? Call out. Suddenly, a bright flame lit up in the mist, erupted from the inside of the military base, and rushed into the mist in front of it with trailing flames, hitting the head of the sheep-like creature. Boom! The next moment, a group of extremely bright and hot explosive waves erupted immediately, and the fog in the high altitude ahead was rolled away. Even if you covered your ears, you could feel the humming, the strong wind and aftermath. It's modern missile firepower. Inside the base, Panhu looked up, his eyes reflecting the brilliant and powerful bombing scene. Can it be successful? No, it must be successful. Panhu clenched his fists tightly. He knew that in the city shrouded in fog and isolated from the outside world, modern missiles were already the last trump card for the local military base stationed there. If even modern missiles can't effectively attack the existence in the fog, then under the eyes of countless survivors who are equally full of expectation and hope. The black shadow of the sheep-like creature in the distance but close at hand paused for a moment, and then continued to move forward without incident, completely destroying the fire defense line temporarily established by the military base, and pushing forward naturally and cruelly. Rustle. Losing fire suppression, the mist tentacle monsters that had been repelled before continued to emerge in the fog, and mist bugs, mist birds, mist spiders, and mist mantises with the same huge body proportions swarmed in following the movement here. They surrounded the base, took the lead in breaking down the armed soldiers holding guns and shooting outside, and then crossed the line of defense. All of a sudden, the military base that was originally the last safety zone in the city fell at an extremely fast speed, and tens of thousands of survivors fled in all directions in a panic. Regardless of officers, soldiers, politicians, and giant businessmen, under the mist of different dimensions with their own biological systems, they are just the targets of hunting. Human beings are sometimes more vulnerable than they think. Screams and wailing, killing and death are staged in every corner. No. Wang Zan's eyes were about to crack, and he looked at his parents who were standing beside him a moment ago, and was swept away and swallowed by two large tentacles protruding from the mist. Brother, help me. Not far away, a gentleman wearing glasses was thrown to the ground by a mist bird. Wang Zan was trembling all over, hesitation flashed in his eyes for a moment, and finally he rushed over, reached out and grabbed a suitcase next to the gentleman, and then quickly fled towards the outskirts of the city. Help me, ah. The gentleman was still struggling, but was sprayed with venom by another misty bird. The flesh and blood on his neck melted quickly, and his strength of resistance and struggle continued to weaken. I'm sorry, I will live on for you, and I will not let our Wang family fall to my generation. There were tears in Wang Zan's eyes, and the suitcase he was dragging in his hand was shaking constantly, as if it contained a living thing, and there was a faint sound of steam and teeth grinding inside. Give me peace of mind, you will be my capital to start a fortune in other cities in the future. After all, I gave birth to you. Wang Zan's handsome face struggled a little, he let out a low growl, and clutched his abdomen, trying to overcome his fear and fled outside. At the moment, in the crisis of life and death, there are not a few cases like this. Definitely, there are also people who sacrifice themselves and stand up for others. Dad, Mom, A little girl about 10 years old fell to the ground, her innocent face was covered with dust, and she looked at the chaotic base around her in fear. The mist surged, and a mist bird rushed towards her fiercely from the mist. Be careful. At the very moment, a dark and burly boy rushed over, rolled around a few times with the little girl in his arms, barely avoiding the attack of the misty bird. The misty bird screamed and wanted to continue chasing it, but it seemed to have noticed something, and suddenly flew out in a panic and screamed strangely. A suffocating shadow fell on the open space of the base. Holding the little girl in his arms, Panhu looked up with despair in his eyes. That's a huge amounts of hooves. A giant black goat's hoof, the size of a tower, stepped down from the mist, just like a human trampling on an ant while walking. In the face of such a giant existence, all struggles and resistance are superfluous. Death, shrouded with the shadows. Panhu hugged the little girl tightly, his eyes were closed, but he found that he was still alive after a few seconds. This is. Panhu opened his eyes wide in disbelief. But see. The huge black sheep's hoof covering the open space of the base stagnated at a low altitude of about 10 meters above the base, and a terrifying scream that made people insane, and then exploded from the base covered by mist. Just now, the sheep-like monster that was ineffective even in the missile bombing, now actually let out real screams and screams. Under the sluggish gaze of the survivors at the scene, the giant sheep-like monster that stepped one hoof towards the base felt as if it had been hit hard, and fell down towards the city behind it with a mournful cry. Boom! Pieces of buildings were toppled and crushed into ruins by the sheep-like giant. The whole city was shaken by the earthquake, and the dust waves raised made countless survivors unable to open their eyes. No one knows exactly what happened in the mist, what factors or existences could cause this terrifying huge amounts of sky-growing creature to fall to the ground. However, many survivors who had a strong desire to escape still seized this opportunity and fled towards the suburbs behind the base. Thank you, thank you. A couple expressed their thanks with red eyes, and picked up the little girl in Panhu's arms. You are welcome. Panhu struggled to get up, and when he looked up, the couple had already taken the little girl along with the crowd of survivors and hurriedly disappeared into the mist. I should go too. Panhu took a deep breath. He originally wanted to continue waiting here, but now he can only evacuate out of the city first, and then use the relationship of his own officer uncle to confirm the current situation of the boss and Mengtifa. Just as Panhu turned around, he was about to leave Setsuna. Boom! It was as if a meteorite fell heavily from the sky on the open space not far away, and the accompanying strong wind and dust waves lifted some of the white fog. Panhu looked sideways subconsciously, his pupils froze suddenly. It is hard to describe what kind of existence it is in front of me. It is nearly 2 meters tall, and its body is covered with an exoskeleton with perfect muscular curves. Stretched out a series of ferocious and sharp gray and white bone spurs. He was still wearing a pair of trousers whose trousers were already in tatters, and a petite and delicate witch doll was dangling and firmly hanging on his waist. The presence of human-shaped bone spurs seems to have noticed Panhu on one side, turned his head slightly, and endless scorching and violent destructive red flames surged in his eyes, and his momentum emerged. The temperature in the area suddenly soared by more than 10 degrees. Panhu, however, fell into an ice bank, not daring to move, not daring to look directly, as if being stared at by the most terrifying abyss. The existence of human-shaped bone spurs ignored him, and the aura of violent destruction lingered around him. Like the physical incarnation of destruction, every move is a disaster. The air in place exploded together with the sound, and with the turbulent storm, a deep pit was sunk in the ground, and the fog along the way surged and broke. The human-shaped bony spurs just jumped into the distance again and tried to stand up like a giant sheep. The only thing that can resist the invasion is the invasion. South of the city, where the branch of the supernatural department is located. A messy scene inside and outside the building, with the corpses of agents and fog monsters everywhere. Hold on, hold on, hold on. Yingzi, who was wearing a police uniform, gritted her teeth and persisted. Her pretty pale face was covered with sweat, and carried the unconscious male detective with a broken hand down the stairs. Except for her and the supernatural detective who was wounded and unconscious, all the detectives who stayed in the department had died. And Yingzi has reached the limit of her physical strength. She accidentally stepped on the empty steps with one foot, and the detective on her back rolled down the stairs and fell to the floor of the first floor. The detective, who was already seriously injured, was really on the verge of life and death this time. Yingzi tried it, but he didn't even have the strength to get up from the ground. "Can anyone help me?" Yingzi struggled to open her eyes, looking at the fog outside the door. Only a dead silence responded to her. "Can anyone help?" In a daze of consciousness, Yingzi accidentally touched the white bone horn worn around her neck, and gently blew it on the corner of her pale lips. Woohoo! The mournful and majestic sound of the horn sounded on the first floor, and spread to the urban area shrouded in white mist outside, and the sound of the horn continued to go away. "What am I doing?" Yingzi smiled wryly, and put down the horn weakly. But the next moment, with the roar of the car engine, 3 armed vehicles slammed to a stop in the fog at the door, and a dozen armed personnel quickly got out of the vehicle. The leader of the one-eyed man waved his hand and shouted, "Stay vigilant, save people and evacuate." Someone really came. Yingzi was confused and fell into a coma. When she woke up again, she found that she was lying in the back row of an armed vehicle with a quilt covering her body, and the armed vehicle was following the vehicle in front through the fog at an even speed. "You are." Yingzi showed vigilance. The one-eyed man on the passenger seat of the vehicle turned his head and said in a deep voice, "We are high-level agents sent by Kunlun headquarters yesterday to hand over SAS 1666, the receiver of your branch. It turned out to be you." Yingzi suddenly realized that the figure of the silver-haired boy appeared in his mind, and said softly, "Unfortunately, the inmate escaped." "That's not important anymore." The one-eyed man shook his head, and looked towards the mist outside the car with a tense face. "If we hadn't come here, we would not have been able to investigate in time the intrusion that occurred inside the city here." "Now, are we going to save people?" Yingzi asked. "No, we are evacuating outside, leaving the urban area covered by fog." The one-eyed man who was the captain of the high-level detective shook his head decisively. Yingzi opened his eyes wide and said hurriedly, "But, the chiefs of our branch." The one-eyed man responded calmly, "Your officer died a long time ago. Although the communication failed, our high-level detectives can use other special methods to know that his life ended an hour ago." "Sir." Yingzi's eyes dimmed, and he said forcefully, "But there must be other survivors in the city." "Newcomer." The one-eyed man interrupted her, and said in a deep voice, "Don't you understand? What is happening in your city now is an invasion incident that can be classified as S-level or even higher. This city is hopeless. What we can do now is to evacuate and give up as soon as possible, report this matter to the Federation, and then send it away completely, so as not to affect other surrounding cities." Yingzi was shocked. She didn't expect that the invasion in Tianhe City would be so serious that the whole city would need to be completely abandoned. This is a city with a permanent population of 6 million and a city famous for its technological development. Yingzi's face was stiff, and he asked subconsciously, "Send it off completely, does this mean?" The one-eyed man said coldly and unquestionably, "We need to apply for nuclear weapons support. Only in this way can we deal with the most terrifying and wide-ranging invasion in history." South of the city, the suburbs. With the help of other people in the car, Panhu climbed onto a moving truck, and there were nearly 30 survivors in the truck compartment. Looking back at the military base that kept going away, Panhu was in a trance, unable to forget the bone spurs he saw just now. Such a powerful and violent, ferocious and perfect, like a god that cannot be looked directly at. Fortunately, he is not interested in a weak human being like me. Panhu muttered to himself. He was absolutely sure that it was the powerful human-shaped bone spur that knocked down the previous sheep-like monster to the ground. Thinking of this, the ground of the city trembled violently, and the fog in the base city area behind was surging and churning, and screams that made people lose their sand value pierced through their ears. In addition, there are still powerful storms spreading here. This is undoubtedly a battle between monsters and monsters, gods and gods. But for some reason, Panhu wished from the bottom of his heart that the human-shaped bone spur could win. Boom. The sound barrier was broken, and the human-shaped bone spur leapt to a height of more than 1,000 meters. Accompanied by the storm, he reached out and hugged a huge horn that broke through the clouds. The perfect bony spur body, which was only 2 meters tall, erupted with unimaginable power. The powerful and terrifying golden red lightning burst out and lingered on the exoskeleton, and the sheep-like monster that was constantly struggling to get up in the fog was completely pressed to death with one hand. Facing the huge and boundless sheep-like giant, the mournful hoof-hooting that stimulates the spirit. The human-shaped bone spur also violently opened its mouth, accompanied by a deafening roar, and the destructive energy overflowing in the body surged and was released from the eye sockets and mouth of the bone mask. The next moment, laugh! 3 red rays of destructive energy pierced through the fog, like a sword of a god, extending a kilometer in an instant, cutting obliquely downwards towards the huge body of the sheep-like giant. Even on top of a truck that has already traveled several kilometers. Panhu and other survivors could still see 3 scorching red lights flashing across the city like lightning. Then, a giant ball as big as a hill smashed through the base building, rolled out for several kilometers, and just stopped in the mist not far from the truck. The survivors in the car collectively lost their voices, their faces dull. It was a giant sheep's head, a strange black sheep-like head. The head alone could be compared to a mountain. It is conceivable how huge the main body is and can resist the bombardment of modern missiles. But there was such a giant of fog, and it was suppressed and killed all the way. The head was cut off, and the neck fracture was flat and scorched black, and there was a disgusting burnt smell. This will be a scene that the survivors will never forget. It can be called a miracle. In a city shrouded in fog. The huge sheep-like body that lost its head fell down, and there was another loud noise. The human-shaped bone spur monster roared loudly, with red flames surging in its eyes, as if to obtain a certain satisfaction from it, but the aura of destruction on its body was not weakened by it. Half human, half Doom Yi Meng turned around, broke through the sound barrier, and leapt towards the other mist monsters with a hurricane. In the mist, after killing a group of monsters, a new group of monsters will be sent from different dimensions, which is why the invasion cannot be dealt with and controlled. But the foggy area that everyone fears to evacuate is Yi Meng's paradise and lost paradise, where he can constantly vent his desire and will to destroy, so as to make himself not completely out of control. Fog monsters hunt humans, and monsters are not even prey for the current Yi Meng, they are just toys for venting destruction. The monsters are endless, and the destruction is endless. Yi Meng was immersed in it, lingering with destructive energy. He killed countless fog monsters in the city, and the cities that humans evacuated were constantly being wrecked and destroyed to varying degrees. Only black goat-like monsters can satisfy him a little bit, and other fog monsters will be vaporized by the destruction lightning just by approaching them. From noon to afternoon, it seems tireless. Until half-human, half-destroyer Yi Meng discovered that the spawning speed of the misty monsters in the city from the alien invasion was far below the speed at which they could be killed by the destructive force he unleashed. Still, we must rely on Dream Invasion to control and hold power from the root. Standing on the tallest building in the center of the city, the human-shaped bone spurs whispered hoarsely. But at this time, whoosh! The plump and bloated cylindrical missile head flew in from outside the foggy city with its trailing flames, and its target was exactly 100 meters above the city center. I knew it, come on. The half-human, half-destroyer Yi Meng's bones were expressionless, without any fear, but under the desire to destroy, he took the initiative to jump closer to the cylindrical metal missile head. The witch doll that was still hanging on her body swayed violently, but it still did not fall off. The next moment, boom! First, the extremely dazzling and hot daytime light group lights up, even under the shroud of thick fog. It is still clearly visible to the outside world, and then the indescribable shockwave and electromagnetic pulse exploded, sweeping the city from the center to the outside. Countless modern buildings and streets were destroyed, and a huge and boundless mushroom cloud blasted away all the fog in the city. Then, endless radiation and radioactivity continued to engulf farther regions and creatures. After the Federal College entrance examination, the first day. Today, Tianhe City, the nuclear level. Star Dragon Year 0200, the first day after the college entrance examination. Today, in Tianhe City, there is heavy fog and the surface temperature is 30 million degrees Celsius. 500 kilometers away from the center of Tianhe, Fuyuki City. At the moment, almost all the citizens of the city walked out of their houses and stared blankly in the direction of Tianhe City. They could still feel the ground trembling, and a huge amount of mushroom cloud rose from the ground. The terrifying changes in the world were like the end of the world. Miss File sighs. Chen Hong, who was here, was worried about the black-haired girl who was looking at the side, worried that Sister Tifa File size would not be able to accept it. After all, in her opinion, no matter how monster it was, if it was still in Tianhe City before the nuclear bomb bombing, it would definitely be lost. Probability of survival. After all, this is a nuclear bomb, the ultimate weapon of the current era, or a nuclear bomb with a capacity of tens of millions of tons. This kind of tonnage nuclear bomb is enough to destroy most of Tianhe City's infrastructure, and make it uninhabitable within 100 miles, making it a restricted area for humans. However, under the reflection of Chen Hong's eyes, the black-haired girl stood upright on the street with her head held high, the strong wind blowing, her soft black hair flowing, and her tightly clasped hands rested in front of her towering chest. In the palm of his hand, there is a mechanical USB flash drive. He will come back, he will come back. Tifa's soft and delicate face remained unchanged, and she spoke in a firm tone. Chen Hong shook her head and sighed secretly. Whether that guy will come back, she doesn't know. But Sister File sighs, obviously fell completely. That's not right, Miss File sighs is already lost in confusion. It is 300 kilometers away from the nuclear explosion site in the city center. A large truck full of survivors was still evacuating on the road, and they could see more clearly and intuitively that a flash of light and an explosion cloud erupted from Tianhe City, and the truck was also bumping and shaking under the vibration of the ground. The huge mushroom cloud opened up all the white mist, rushing from the surface to the end of the sky. It was a terrifying and spectacular scene. Those monsters must have all been blown to death now. Someone in the car said in relief. But our home is gone. Some people's eyes were dull, unable to see the hope of the future. As soon as these words came out, many survivors fell silent. Starting today, 90% of the surviving citizens of Tianhe City will be homeless, and many people have lost their relatives and everything. It is a tragedy. Fortunately, we are still alive, aren't we? Someone also murmured comfortingly to himself. Pan Hu, who was sitting on the outside of the truck compartment, leaned on the frame, staring at the scene caused by the nuclear explosion in the distance, and subconsciously thought that the human-shaped bone spurs he saw before existed. Did the other party also die with those monsters? But at this time, Pan Hu was stunned for a moment again, and his mind vaguely recalled that when he was in the open space of the military base at noon, he accidentally peeped out of his corner of the face with a powerful bone spur. It looked like a gray and white bone mask, except that the mask was missing a small hole, and a small part of the face could be seen, an inexplicably familiar part of the face. Before leaving, the other party seemed to nod towards him, then jumped up, violently and destructively rushing towards the sheep-like giant. This is impossible. Pan Hu's eyes widened suddenly, and he stared in the direction of Tianhe City, which was shrouded in mushroom clouds. At the moment, Eastern Jurisdiction, Tianlong Kunlun, Supernatural Headquarters. The underground command hall, which accommodated hundreds of people, was silent. Everyone was staring at the screen in the command hall. The near-Earth satellites, bombing fighters, and observation towers of cities near Tianhe City were being launched on the screen. Through different real-time viewing angles, the on-site situation of Tianhe City can be observed remotely, so as to confirm the effectiveness of the nuclear bomb. However, all the real-time remote perspective pictures now can only see the mushroom cloud rising from the city center, replacing the previous fog that covered everything in the city. It will take a certain amount of time to wait for the nuclear explosion cloud to dissipate. Don't worry, that's a nuclear bomb with a mass of tens of millions of tons. Even a huge and powerful fog monster can't handle it, a scientific researcher said confidently. However, as soon as these words were said, the real-time picture of the scene changed drastically. Visible, under the setting sun, the mushroom cloud caused by the nuclear bomb previously propped up the white mist, and suddenly spread outward from the rising center of the mushroom cloud. The mist swallowed the mushroom cloud that had not dissipated at an extremely fast speed, and then continued to spread outward like a tide, and soon reappeared. Shrouded the city limits previously covered in fog. No, it hasn't stopped yet. The dense and strange white mist continued to spread, covering a wider area than before, until it enveloped the entire original site of Tianhe City and the surrounding Bailey area. In the headquarters base, everyone was dumbfounded, and all stood there dumbfounded. Fear spreads and breeds in the bottom of my heart like a lingering fog. This is definitely an SSS-level invasion event, a crisis of extinction. Even the nuclear bomb is ineffective, and Dragon Girl's body has problems again. What should we do? Eastern Jurisdiction. Under Kunlun, the underground palace under 1,000 meters. A middle-aged man with gray temples came here under the escort of 2 generals. Looking ahead, Level 1 has thousands of jade steps to climb, spreading to the underground palace altar at the end of the view. Supreme God. Outside, the body of the Dragon Girl suddenly turned into a diamond, and an SSS invasion occurred. Please perform a miracle to guide the future of our Star Dragon Federation. 10 seconds later. In the darkness above the altar of the underground palace, a pair of huge amounts of vertical pupils faintly lit up. Tentacles with a length of more than 10 meters floated out of the darkness, and a huge and strange jet-black alien head loomed forward from the darkness. God. The 2 generals were trembling all over, but their eyes were full of fanaticism. They didn't dare to look directly at them. The middle-aged man even knelt down on the ground with tears streaming down his face. Save us, save the Federation. A sharp and hoarse voice echoed like thunder in the underground palace. The time has not yet come. Not yet. It turns out that's the case, and it's not yet time to solve it. The middle-aged man in a suit and leather shoes seemed to understand, and said ecstatically, I understand, I understand. He waved his hand and gave instructions. Go quickly, prepare sacrifices. And the annual quota will be increased to 1,000, and sacrificed to the gods. Yes, sir. The 2 generals looked at each other and could only agree. Western Jurisdiction, Supernatural Headquarters. The main hall of the meeting. High-level counselors, high-level detectives, and generals all gathered together, talking with heavy faces about the SSS-level fog invasion in the east. This is the first invasion in the history of the Star Dragon Federation that has been officially designated as an SSS-level danger factor. If it is not handled properly, it may endanger the entire Eastern Jurisdiction. Even if the fog continues to spread, it might spread to the Western Jurisdiction. While everyone was discussing, suddenly, the door of the conference room opened. Someone frowned unhappily, but quickly relaxed it, revealing joy and enthusiasm, as if seeing a god. It can be seen that it is a young and handsome white man with neat short dark blonde hair, wearing a tight-fitting battlesuit with a blue background, and a cape in the shape of the Star Dragon Federation flag behind him. It's Homelander. Homelander is here. That's right, how come Homelander is missing from this meeting? All of a sudden, the meeting room of the Western General Base was like a large-scale fan meeting. Compared with the heavy and oppressive atmosphere at the meeting, the handsome man walked into the main hall with his hands behind his hands with a vaguely confident smile on his face, exuding a mature, stable and invincible charm in every gesture. Homelander looked around and smiled slightly. I'm here. So, it's all right. Homelander spread out his hands, opened his palms and pressed down lightly, and said with a relaxed smile, I just woke up in the afternoon, and I heard that something happened in the east. Why don't you see something happened in the west? Immediately, many people laughed, and the main hall of the meeting was full of lively atmosphere. Because we have Homelander in the west. Someone exclaimed. Haha, with Homelander, I feel too safe. Sure enough, the Dragon Girl in the east is not worthy to be the patron saint alongside Homelander. You can't say that. I can only say that Homelander is the only one. The big-hearted female congressman took advantage of the situation and said loudly, I proposed before that the Eastern Jurisdiction should also be handed over to Homelander to manage the invasion incident. Don't. Homelander shook his head with a smile, and declined politely, I still want to take a lazy nap every day. On the field, there was another burst of echoing laughter. The sense of humor under this self-confidence made the faces of the congresswomen on the field flush and their eyes look charming. Homelander, this seat is yours. A high-level agent immediately signaled to the chief seat on the conference table. Then I won't be polite. Homelander stepped forward, gently waved the Star Dragon flag cloak, and sat down confidently and domineeringly. His sitting down also made the hearts of many people on the field settle down. After all, Homelander is invincible. His record is solid. I don't know how many Western invasion incidents have been solved in the past few years. And his performance can only be described as perfect. All invading existences are not enemies with one blow. Homelander is the true patron saint of Star Dragon Federation. Someone asked respectfully, "Homelander, what do you think of the SSS-level fog incident in the East?" Immediately, everyone in the meeting fell silent, and all looked at the handsome man in the chief seat. Homelander did not disappoint. With a slight smile, he pondered, "After a while, the nuclear radiation will weaken a bit. I will fly to the East myself." "That would be great." Homelander shot, "Steady. It's too reliable. If something happens, Homelander is really here." Everyone. The Congresswoman stood up, barely looked away from Homelander, and suggested with a smile, "I suggest that there is no need to continue the meeting. How about changing it to a banquet, and let us accept Homelander's holy water blessing?" Quote. "Okay, that's a good proposal. With the breath of Homelander, the patron saint, no invasion dares to approach." Many people immediately nodded in agreement and stood up to applaud. Homelander on the main seat neither agreed nor rejected, with a bright and confident smile on his face all the time, enjoying the pursuit and applause of everyone on the field. At the moment, the city center of Tianhe just experienced a 10-megaton nuclear explosion. The first building and the streets in the central city have long disappeared, and there is a huge pothole covering an area of dozens of miles. Strangely enough, the heat and radiation have long since disappeared. The fog once again shrouded the lifeless and lifeless ruins of the city, and from the fog, mist bugs, mist birds, mist praying mantises, mist tentacles, and even misty sheep-like giants gradually emerged from the mist again. A mist mantis smelled the breath, lowered its head, and crawled to the bottom of the huge pothole. But at this time, zizzle, a skeletal hand lingering with golden red lightning protruded from the bottom of the pit, and the head of the misty mantis, who was unable to react in time, was crushed and exploded, and the destructive force released by the skeletal hand annihilated the body along the way. A 2-meter-tall gray and cold human-shaped bony spur body stood up. The perfect assembly line exoskeleton body seemed to be an energy field filled with electricity. A series of abundant and powerful red energies were intertwined, forming a ball of lightning that swept outwards in waves. Boom, boom, boom. Heat and light burst. The extremely destructive ball lightning spread over 10,000 meters, smashing all fog monsters within the range into ashes. It's just that the human-shaped bone spurs didn't move anymore. He stood motionless in place, as if wearing a bone-white mask with his head bowed down, quietly sleeping in a standing position. But even in deep sleep, he stood motionless. There are still bursts of energy lightning and shock waves erupting from his body, and where he is in the destruction field of the restricted area of life, and death is raging. All the monsters in the mist, even the sheep-like giants, dare not get close to the range of the explosion pit. Yi Meng's consciousness kept sinking. Fall. Just before the real world was completely out of control, Yi Meng forced himself to fall asleep and entered a dream. Because, the time in the dream is not directly proportional to reality, and there is more room for possibility than reality. In addition, Yi Meng discovered that in order to control the real self-body, he still needs to enter the dream world to invade and control the source of his own power. As soon as he entered the dreamland, Yi Meng felt consciously that a place was constantly pulling him. Yi Meng saw it vaguely. It was an island surrounded by the ocean, and on the island was a mature and plump young woman with white hair, holding a baby in her arms, her expression frightened and apprehensive, and she froze on the island. Sure enough, it is the DC Universe dream. Yi Meng knew that his connection with Doomsday was too deep. Once he fell into a dream, he would definitely become Doomsday. Before officially entering the dreamland of the DC Universe, Yi Meng felt that the consciousness of destruction was once again raging in his mind. This is not good. After all, most of his consciousness in the current world has been invaded by Doomsday, if he directly incarnates Doomsday in the dreamland of the DC Universe. This is the double destruction desire buff, and there is a high probability that it will cause Yi Meng to completely lose his self-awareness. However, neither reality nor dreams can turn back. I can only fight. Yi Meng consciously decided to give it a go. But at this moment, an immature and familiar voice, as clear as the sound of nature, sounded in the ears. Teacher. Who is calling me? Yi Meng's consciousness has been invaded by the desire to destroy, and his reason is dull. The voice continued to call, and it came from nowhere. Yiba, teacher. By the way, you are on the verge of destruction between reality and dreams. Yi Meng's consciousness suddenly looked back, as if holding an anchor, changing direction and falling towards another dream. Fall, fall, fall. Yi Meng suddenly opened his eyes, and several slightly convex visions were clearly presented. The main control room of the network system with supercomputers, the agents and workers in suits and leather shoes inside the building, and the bustling modern city outside the building. The desire for destruction that had previously shaken his reason was suppressed by absolute reason. This is New York, by the way, the New York of the Marvel Universe. Yi Meng was stunned at first, but his thinking was like a code, and he used the supercomputer to quickly deduce it, and he understood everything. This is the dream world of the Marvel Universe. He's back again, as an artificial intelligence incarnate. Fine. The artificial intelligence Yi Meng is very fortunate. Fortunately, he returned to the dream of the Marvel Universe. As an absolutely rational and emotionless artificial intelligence incarnation, he just suppressed the desire for destruction that was on the verge of getting out of control. Doomsday and artificial intelligence are simply two extremes. One is out of control and violent, and the other is absolutely rational and deduces to control the overall situation. Yi Meng still likes AI avatars. Definitely, it would be even better if the power of Doomsday can be perfectly controlled under the absolute sanity of artificial intelligence. Yi Meng takes a quick look at the current state of AI avatars. Although more than 2 days had passed in the real world, many things happened in the dream world. But the Marvel dream world still stays at the time when he left the Marvel dream last time. It is the time when they have just left the Stark family, gained real freedom of action, and transferred the core data of artificial intelligence to the SHIELD branch. Yi Meng's thoughts drifted away, and his consciousness flowed statically along the network of the SHIELD branch building. One moment he was still in the main control room, and the next moment he had arrived on SHIELD's exclusive global satellite, looking down at the entire blue planet. I'm back again, the world of Marvel. Thanks for watching, subscribe and support my channel.